start. And so let me go ahead and unmute Rachael Lovallo, our next presenter. Rachael, maybe you can unmute yourself.
Hello, Joel. How's it going?
Doing fine over here. As you can see from my window, it's already night, so we're pretty cool in here. So I suggest we do the following. First of all, I will stop sharing so that you can start sharing your screen. And in the meantime, I will introduce you. What do you think?
That sounds great.
Okay, so feel free, go ahead and share your screen.
I'll start sharing.
Okay, so in the meantime, Rachael, she's a senior test engineer at Pulsara, a company connecting healthcare teams to bring accurate data and improve patient outcome. By the way, we can see your screen. Rachael, you will be talking about testing the healthcare industry where releasing dangerous bugs can actually have a serious effect in the lives of people. And I guess that today, we're more aware than that than ever before, obviously. So Rachael, the floor is yours. I remind everyone, if you want to ask questions, use the Q&A or go ahead directly into the Slack channels. So here you go.
Thank you so much, Joel. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, or maybe even good morning. Some of you are already waking up tomorrow. As Joel said, my name is Rachael Lovallo, and I'm honored to be here speaking to you today. I'm kind of a newbie in terms of speaking at conferences. This is my first online test conf. So I'm a senior test engineer at Pulsara, and Pulsara is a healthcare technology startup that has a goal of improving patient care in time-sensitive emergencies via a platform that helps emergency medical workers communicate. And as of today, we have a medical professional and patient-facing mobile apps for Android and iOS, a browser app, and a public API, all of which are tested by a busy team of 7. But today, I'm not here to tell you about my company and what we do. That's boring. But I am going to focus on something that's central to Pulsara's mission and purpose, and that is communication. So start by picturing for a moment a healthcare emergency, such as a stroke or a trauma event where we know that time passing corresponds to tissue lost. And we know that poor communication can waste time and drastically decrease that patient's chances. So stay with me here. I would argue that there are strong parallels between the importance of communication in that emergency scenario and communication on a development team that's trying to ship a high quality product in a short time frame. When communication is good, not only do customers get the product faster and find fewer bugs once it's in their hands, but the development group builds respect for each other, there's a greater sense of team, and everyone just enjoys their time at work more. So what I want to share with you today are 3 actionable ways that you can improve quality through communication in your workplaces as we continue through 2020. The first is write each bug with bulletproof steps to reproduce. The second is to open the door to communication with your coworkers. And the third is to get a second set of eyes on your work. Haha, I can advance slides. All right, item 1 seems super obvious, right? Other than you're all probably confused about why I say bulletproof. Basically what I mean is if you can write your bug in such a way that anyone can read it, be able to understand the basic issue and reproduce it, it saves tons of time. And it ups the chances of the bug actually getting fixed as opposed to closed as not reproducible, or we've all gotten the classic, well, it works on my machine. So basically, we just need to not be like this doctor in the comic here, always taking important details for granted and leaving our teams confused and having to come back to us with follow-up questions. So I'm thinking back here, there was a time when I started testing software when things were really simple. Basically, my developer coworker and I would just discuss any bugs I found over the cube wall. Because we sat near each other, we worked together well, and we just talked often. But then I switched jobs and suddenly felt like I was starting from scratch, learning to work with new developers at a much bigger company. And some of those developers weren't even in my building, much less a cube away. and some of them were in another state or another country even. So it really took some trial and error to learn to interact effectively with a whole new group of people that was structured way differently. So now skip forward to Pulsera, where the whole process is a little different. How and when bugs get fixed is a decision that requires more than just myself and one developer coworker, and that's a good thing. New issues end up going to a triage team, and they decide which bugs get fixed and which upcoming release they'll go into. And now the triage team isn't made up of people that I work with directly on a daily basis, and sometimes the group even changes. So it's a different communication challenge. And as I first started, I had days where I honestly became frustrated with myself because the triage team was having to regularly ask follow-up questions on my tickets. And I felt like I was wasting my team's time. And worse, we all know that bugs that require a lot of those follow-up questions just lead to misunderstandings. And sometimes that leads to code churn, even project delays. So I started to really ask myself, how can I get any person at my company to understand my bug reports without having to come back to me with these follow-up questions? And it turns out there are a couple of simple ways to make bug reports easier for anyone to understand. The first one is something that my team has actually baked into how we test since the team has grown. We have a standard report structure. So I say that, but not everyone is identical. We all try to list things like the steps to reproduce, obviously, the problematic result, the result we expect to see when the issue is fixed, and any helpful notes about the environment, the build number, so on and so forth, that someone will need to reproduce the bug. So since our bug write-up format is similar, it's familiar to the rest of the development team, and the triage team doesn't have to ask as many questions. And beyond that, they can even increase efficiency because they know just where to skip to understand the issue quickly. I'm guessing maybe some of them read the whole bug, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of them just skip straight to the result, maybe read some environment details, and they don't need anything further to know who the bug should be assigned to and which release it should ship with. So this idea of structured bug reports is kind of similar to how medical teams run standardized diagnostic tests when trying to figure out what's going on with the patient. So for example, a stroke score is a common way to quickly determine the severity of a stroke. This example here is for BFAST, and it's just one of a bunch of test types, and they're often performed by EMTs in the field before a patient is even brought into the emergency room. So in this particular test, the EMT looks at a patient's balance, their eyes, facial droop, any arm drift, and their speech one by one, and determines if they're either normal or abnormal. And there's a well-known rubric that determines what's considered normal versus not. This is actually an infographic for non-medical people, so you can see this info below each image. So for example, if someone's speech is slurred, we would consider that abnormal. The point is that the whole process is quick and gives a result that any medical professional can understand, and it gives the patient a fighting chance because their whole care team knows not just that it's likely a stroke, but how severe that stroke might be. So it's the same for bugs that are written according to a formula. Getting well-defined bugs into developers' hands ups that efficiency and the likelihood of that issue getting resolved and shipped, which we know means a higher quality product in customers' hands because those bugs aren't there. All right, so ignore this slide for a moment. Structure isn't everything. You can try adding color images or even videos to your bug reports. I often try things like making the problematic result bright red and bold, or I'll add a video of a clunky UI animation. And I don't just do this because it's fun, although I do find it fun. Researchers have actually found that everyone has different ways they take in information best. And the main types are defined as visual, auditory, a reading or writing preference, and kinesthetic, which is like touching, feeling. or the VARC learning styles for short. We'll note that nasal learning is not one of the VARC learning styles. It turns out that VARC is very controversial these days, and I'll get back to that later. But the important thing for now is that it's accepted that people have a preference for a learning style, and they take in information most efficiently if it's presented to them that way. So that means that going beyond words in a bug makes it multiple times more likely to be easily understood by your team right away. Think about it. What are the odds that everyone on your team learns best through reading? Probably pretty low. So aside from using descriptive words within your bug structure, play with color, make text bold, add those images or videos, and use them to draw attention to the results that you think are most important. I'll note that I'm not perfect at this, and that's not really the point. The goal is to experiment to see what helps more bugs get into a developer's hands faster versus going through that question and answer cycle where the developer is coming back to you asking things like, what did you mean in step 7? I still don't get it. It's a fun mental challenge to put yourself in another person's shoes and try to present information that will make sense to anyone on the team. But as an added benefit, if you make a bug easy to understand, your developer will see that and appreciate you for thinking of them on the receiving end of that bug. It breaks down that idea of, oh, developers throw code over the wall to QA and we throw it back. It helps build your team. So let's get back to learning styles for a minute and talk about why the idea of assigning learning styles to people is controversial right now. So for years, researchers tried to take those learning styles a step further and say that because we each have a learning preference, we'll do better in school and in life in general if information is always presented to us in a way that we understand best. And it turns out this isn't true, and it actually might do us a disservice because human beings are adaptable and anyone is capable of learning via an avenue that doesn't come naturally. It's actually good for us to be challenged to take in info in ways that are difficult. So I say this because it's good news for you as you write bugs, because it means you're not a failure if you don't meet each team member's learning style while communicating with them. Instead, just treat it as a challenge for yourself. Explore adding different types of details and see which work. And as you try it, you might get addicted to seeing more efficiency in action. So to recap point 1, use an agreed upon structure for writing bugs on your team, kind of like how medical staff use conventions such as stroke scores. Then even if some team members don't naturally take in written info well, they'll probably get used to it. And even more importantly, get creative with color and adding an image or video of a bug to a ticket to help get the issue clearly presented to any team member, regardless of how they mentally process information. This will lead to bugs you find making sense to your team, getting fixed more quickly, and ultimately to your company shipping that higher quality product. I'm not going to read this quote, but this is basically my philosophy on writing bugs. All right, so we'll move on to point 2 now. One of the biggest time sucks in testing is the time lost when testers never directly interface with the people writing the code they test. I think this is becoming more rare these days, but I'm going to say it one more time because it's really that important. One of the biggest time sucks in testing is the time lost when testers don't interface with the people writing the code. I think about it kind of like these grain silos here. If there's no contact, it's really hard to get functionality from A to B to C to out the door to the customer without a loss of either time or quality or both. So for the rest of 2020, I challenge you to really talk to the people writing the code you test. So why? Let's start by thinking about communication with your doctor. The smartest doctor ever is nothing without bedside manner, right? Maybe a doctor with no bedside manner is completely incapable of listening to the patient's symptoms, so they might get the diagnosis totally wrong. Or maybe they can't communicate to the patient about what to do to fix symptoms, and the patient just keeps on suffering. So just like the doctor is trying to do here, there are established ways that health professionals interface with patients to help them feel heard and open a door for trust, such as open body language, pausing to let the patient talk, and so on and so forth. So let's go a little bit deeper. What's the science behind talking face-to-face? It turns out that communication in person, or more often on video these days, if we're being honest, right, versus over something like email is better, because sort of like writing your bug reports, there's a lot more to communication than words. If you're physically in the same room or in a video call with your video turned on, your teammates are seeing your body language, they're hearing your tone of voice, and you're actually looking each other in the eye. So eye contact is especially vital. It turns out that making eye contact while talking builds both trust and empathy. And we actually have neurons called mirror neurons that help get two talking people on the same page about what is being said. And that can go for better or for worse, of course. I think we've all had these experiences. If you go into a discussion very defensive and tense, it's likely that the other person will mirror that back to you, and you're not going to have the most productive conversation. However, if you go into a discussion confident but ready to listen and showing respect for the other person, it's likely that they'll give you the same treatment, and you'll both leave the talk feeling like you're on the same team. So at Pulsera, we practice talking to each other in a few structured ways. The first one we refer to as pair testing. Actually, I'm kidding. I might be the only one who has a name for this, but we do use it quite a bit. And we apply it to tedious test scenarios where we know the functionality won't be quite right on the first try, or those boomerang bugs that have been tested and reopened a few times, and we're all getting frustrated because they just seem to bounce back and forth and never quite be fully fixed. So in pair testing, ideally I sit down with my developer coworker in the same space, or we get on a video call where we can see each other's faces and screens, and my coworker will make the fix, and I'll pull the change right away into my local testing environment. Often I'm checking out their branch. And if I find any bugs, I can show my coworker right away, as opposed to writing another bug, waiting for it to get triaged and for them to look at it tomorrow. So they look at the bug with me, they can make another change on the spot, and I can pull and test again quickly. And we just iterate like that as much as we need to until we both agree that the functionality looks good. This process is also great for building empathy, because I can't help but see the gnarly code that my coworker is dealing with, and the developer is seeing my testing goals in action. It also means the bug gets fixed in maybe an hour or two. I can't say I've ever had this take longer than that, as opposed to at least another full day for the bug to get triaged, put in the developer's queue, them to pick it up and actually have time to look at it. So I know this isn't practical for every project or even every company. So if you can't pair test, a lighter version of this is just to practice asking your coworkers, hey, what can I try testing to help track this bug to root cause? Use your words to show you're on the same team, and then make sure you follow through with your actions. Another way that we talk at Pulsera in a structured way is via test parties, which is a concept my manager came up with. I think he's here today. Hi, Brian. Where we sit down with other testers, but also some developers and stakeholders, such as customer support. And our goal is to test new functionality in a real world scenario where we take on the roles of EMTs, doctors and nurses, and try to use our product as they would. And we found that the feedback from both developers who wrote the code and know where the bugs could be hiding, as well as people like customer support who haven't been staring at this new functionality for weeks and who typically have the emergency medical backgrounds that we testers might not have. Those people being at the table too really helps us find bugs that we would have missed otherwise. And in addition to that, we learn about areas with potentially brittle code, as well as more of the real world workflows that we then incorporate in future test efforts. So a test party impacts both the short-term quality of the upcoming release, but also the quality of those future projects. And of course, there are also much less structured ways to talk. So if your team doesn't have established habits in place that management is using to get testers talking to developers, you might consider starting to make your own. One which has kind of grown out of COVID times and working from home for us is the mantra, Zoom early, Zoom often. And it means that anytime you're in doubt about a conversation and things are just getting confusing, take the initiative to reach out and have a quick conversation versus prolonging those misunderstandings via Slack or email. So the challenge, here we're talking about a call with video on. There's temptation to join with your video off because it feels unnatural and awkward, but then you're missing out on that eye contact and body language and all of those benefits that we talked about earlier. And you may as well just be emailing. It does start to feel more natural over time to talk over video, and maybe some of you are already experiencing that since a bunch of us have been working at home for months now, right? So I want to step back for a moment and acknowledge that I'm ignoring a huge elephant in the room here. People actually hate and fear talking face-to-face because they perceive them to be a waste of time, especially now, and especially millennials. I can say it because I am one. There are tons of memes out there. These are just 4. There were probably thousands that I could have picked that express our collective distaste for verbal communication in this era. And the internet is also littered with recent scholarly articles about how meetings and calls kill productivity, which ultimately means slower development, less testing, and lower quality. So all of the things I said the opposite of a moment ago. So even though communication is really important to me as an introvert and as someone who just likes to get work done each day, I do feel frustrated if I end up in long conversations that don't seem useful or super long meetings every single day. So I don't agree with the articles and memes, but I can understand where they're coming from and I can laugh at these. So why am I still advocating for that face-to-face conversation? It's because I strongly believe that if respect and a desire to get a project done with high quality are at the core of your communication, no one's going to leave that talk feeling like their time got wasted. And experts actually recommend a few ways to respect others' time in face-to-face conversations. First, you can go into the talk with an end goal and some well-baked questions that you thought about in advance. And the other party will probably notice that you're prepared and they'll have more respect for you and be more ready to help you. Second, I like to bring a notebook or have my computer ready to take some notes. I actually have a very disorganized document of lessons learned. It's disorganized because it's just for me, where I challenge myself to write things down so that I don't have to ask the same question twice. Sometimes it still happens, but I learn more and my team likes to work with me more if I try to take in and assimilate that knowledge captured from those conversations. And lastly, especially for meetings, this is just my soapbox, consider setting a hard time limit. When an hour is up, the group goes back to other work. And if there's more to talk about, maybe you need to revisit, maybe there can be a more well-defined purpose, or maybe you just need another meeting at some point down the line. So I'll end here with this quote from the author of Emotional Intelligence, of course, that I felt related. I won't read it, you can. Basically, whenever you have a question you can't solve on our own, or when a Slack thread or email chain has gone on for a while, there's no resolution, challenge yourself to start a verbal communication face-to-face, whether that's ending up physically in the same room as the other people or over a video call. And it might go against your natural tendencies as an introvert or a millennial, but the research shows that if you go in confident and with those well-baked questions, your coworkers will mirror your attitude back to you and be more likely to understand and help you. And what happens if you gain information on a problem, tool, or project from that conversation? All it means is that you have more tools to test more thoroughly, which is going to lead to a higher quality product now and in the future. So it's a win-win. It's a good use of time. Okay, let me get some tea before I launch into point 3. Okay, so I'd like to start with a little background. When I started at Pulsera about 2 years ago, there were 4 of us testers, including my manager, and maybe 15 of us total on the dev team, and some of those people weren't even full-time yet. So I was coming from a huge company, so I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And while I was mulling it over and deciding whether or not to take the role, a mentor told me that working at a startup will feel like paddling your own canoe, whereas working at a big company can sometimes feel like trying to paddle a cruise ship. And I'll say now with some hindsight that he wasn't wrong, but the mental image I got initially was maybe a tad more idyllic than the reality, which can sometimes feel like this picture of the Hubbard expedition where you're guiding a loaded canoe upriver with your team. And basically, to make it work, you really have to set aside your ego, lean on your teammates, and you have to be able to take constructive criticism. That's maybe my most valuable experience in my job so far. Every day, I really have to think critically about how I'm testing and improve in some way. And my coworkers help and challenge me in that. And I'll say I've never done a job as hard, but I've also never done a job as worthwhile, where I'm still actively learning a couple of years in. And this third action item is really related to this practice of constantly trying to build our testing skills. Simply stated, it's asking for a second set of eyes on your work. So for an example from medicine that illustrates why this is important, we don't have to look far. Just think about surgery. So in picture A, we see a team performing a surgery on a patient, and this all looks to be in order. It's kind of what we expect when thinking of a surgery. Versus in picture B, we see Dr. Leonid Rogozov, I'm probably butchering his name, I'm sorry, operating on himself to remove his appendix. I tried to leave it blurry, and I think I failed. For those of us who might be squeamish, there's a reason that I test healthcare software and don't work with patients myself, and I'll always have huge respect for healthcare workers. So anyway, Dr. Rogozov did manage to successfully extract his own appendix at the Soviet station in the Antarctic, but he had to. It was really his only option to save his life. And I think we can all agree that we wouldn't want to be in his shoes even if we had the surgical skills. And none of us are going to go out and recommend self-surgery as a best practice. We know that surgery takes a team of doctors, nurses, and OR staff all working together and performing those individual roles to ensure the best outcome of the patient. So why all the people? Some are there to help, we know, anesthetizing the patient, handing the surgeon tools. However, the key that I want to draw attention to is that the standard surgical team consists of one surgeon and one assistant surgeon. The assistant is another set of hands, but also if complications arise, the two can discuss the best path forward. So in other words, the patient has increased chances of a better outcome because there's more than one person's expertise going into the procedure. And this is so well known that best practices tell us there should just be 2 surgeons in the room. Okay, so taking this a step further, research on teams outside of medicine also supports this idea that collaboration between people leads to better outcomes. And I'm thinking now specifically in terms of businesses. So there's this concept that's becoming popular in developing teams that's called cognitive diversity. And it means actually seeking out team members based on how they might have different knowledge or even approach thinking and problem solving differently than other team members. And it's been proven to be beneficial to have different experiences and thinking patterns in the same room when trying to ship a successful product. There was a study from the Harvard Business Review that measured how several different teams handled a complex problem within a set time limit. So everyone working on the same problem at the same time. And they compared the minutes taken to solve the problem against measurements of the cognitive diversity of the group. And they were specifically looking at knowledge processing, which is the extent to which individuals would rather use knowledge they already have versus gaining new knowledge in the moment based on the evidence that's in front of them. And perspective, which is whether individuals would rather use what's in their own brain or whether they're willing to listen to what other people have to say. Anyway, the point is that the study found a really high correlation between the teams with high cognitive diversity and the teams which performed the challenge correctly the fastest. In fact, some of the teams with little cognitive diversity didn't even finish. So both this example from medicine and the concept of cognitive diversity simply tell us that 2 heads are better than 1 when facing a testing challenge. So how can we take this information and apply it to our testing to help improve quality on our projects? I'd say that one good way to do this is to just take initiative on your own and ask for a second set of eyes on your work. But I'm always going to argue that it's even better to make getting regular feedback something that's baked into your team's best practices. So one thing that my manager implemented at Pulsera is a test review practice where my team spends part of our time testing and part of our team looking over coworkers' testing notes. And we're looking to offer ideas for additional scenarios to cover, maybe bringing up some things that were missed. And sometimes we're just offering kudos because they did a great job. The key is that nothing is considered done until this happens, and the practice of being the reviewer and the reviewed are both challenges that help us grow. Not to mention, we found bugs this way that would otherwise go straight to production, because what happens next after QA is done? We're hopefully shipping the product. So test review is just one more gate to make sure that release is really ready to ship. And that's key for us having a healthcare product, because bad bugs in production are something we need to avoid more than even some other products. So a more informal way that we do this is by having a test group Slack channel that we check into regularly. And if we have questions, it's understood that we go there first. And if someone else asks a question, we jump in and help. We also rarely test a product entirely on our own. We're splitting the work with at least one other person to some degree, of course, depending on availability and what other people are working on. Basically, we think that testing alone is like trying to edit your own paper in college. At some point, you've stared at it so long that you're going to miss obviously misspelled words that another person will see right away if they take a look with fresh eyes. And an added benefit of multiple people testing a project, or of everyone being in the same chat and seeing all those questions that get asked, is that more people learn new functionality that's going into the product, and they're more ready to test it the next time it comes around without there being this big learning curve and time lost. And we'll also often have good discussions about, well, when should we automate this? How can we automate this? Those discussions happen earlier. So to recap, point 3, just like we want a competent team with us if we need surgery, we should test using our team as a resource and a second set of eyes. Together we'll find more bugs and we'll be more efficient in the future if we all know the different parts of the product. And I'm coming up on my time. I should talk faster. So in conclusion, what I'm advocating for, and we talked about it, the research backs it up, is that communication is like a muscle. The more you incorporate these 3 action items, the more you can leverage good communication to get a higher quality product into the hands of your customers faster. And in my line of work, that looks a lot like helping emergency medical workers communicate better, ultimately improving patient care. So I'm going to say it only one more time. The action items are, number 1, write each bug with bulletproof steps to reproduce. Practice opening that door to communication with your coworkers, and ask for a second set of eyes on your work. So I think we've left a few minutes for questions, so please share those in the chat if you have any and haven't asked already, and also use that Slack channel. I'll be checking for questions and discussion for the next few weeks. And thank you all for your time today.
Okay, first of all, thanks for the session. I think that you did bring up some pretty good points, and you shed some light on stuff, some of them new and some of them that I guess it's more commonly known, but there are still some questions, I think, or at least some of them are pretty interesting. And then if you're okay, then we may go over them and you can try to answer them live. What do you think?
That sounds great.
Okay. So there's a question here by Connor, and he says, used to do some sort of, some version of pair testing in the past. Have you ever found that it can make some developers become reliant on having a tester watch them fix stuff as it fits their ego? Meaning, and over time, he found that he had to keep going at it more and more just to get some things done. Meaning it had a reverse effect on the work of the developer.
Oh, interesting. I have not found that, but I can imagine a scenario where that could definitely be an issue. I think I would approach that by just being really in tune with what's going on. And I'm always kind of looking at testing and being like, all right, could that have been more efficient? Is this practice still valuable? Yes or no? And then making changes based on that. So probably if I perceive pair testing with one specific developer to not be valuable, I would pull the plug on that and try to interface with that person in a different way.
Okay, so basically being flexible and understand what works for each case.
Yep.
Okay. Another question here, and again, it might be okay if you haven't met this in your side, but it says a question regarding eye contact. There are neurodiverse team members, people who are autistic, more than introverts. I guess many of us are introverts, but people who really are on the spectrum, I do get to work with them, that for them having, not doing eye contact is not out of empathy. How do you think that we should look at that? Meaning how to approach that?
That's a really good point, and something that I didn't think of, but that I probably should have thought of, was that comes in with cognitive diversity, right? Having people who maybe on the spectrum are valuable members of the team. And I think it just comes down to getting to know your team. And the more you know them, you know that maybe eye contact won't be there, but there are other ways to make a connection. And just being mindful of that and thoughtful about those interactions and going into each conversation with a goal of making that connection and making this talk beneficial for both sides. You're on the same team trying to get the same goal accomplished, right?
And by the way, in my experience with people who are on the spectrum, I did some work with testers on the spectrum. It's not a matter of not being able to make eye contact. And even when they talk to someone, it's a matter of them feeling comfortable. So it may be for those people, it's a matter of, okay, let's make sure that we pair them with the same developers a number of times and they feel more comfortable with that. But again, just in my very, very limited experience with people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just being comfortable with your team is so important, and being sensitive to ways that can help build that sense of team and comfort level between coworkers just makes the whole development process go more smoothly.
And by the way, regarding the spectrum, one of the things that I've also realized by working with people on the spectrum is that there are many people who we don't even realize that they're on the spectrum. We just think that they're introverts. So it's not, meaning the spectrum is really a spectrum. So we don't need to also place labels on people. I know that I've had that mistake done a number of times. Okay, I'm looking for some, okay, so here's an interesting question. How do you enforce that bugs should be written nicely with bullet points by developers as well? Meaning, is it something that it's one way, or when a developer writes a bug, you also make sure that they are writing the right bugs?
Oh, interesting. I would say that I have seen developers not following the same structure that we testers use, but that more and more they are. So I can't say we've had a specific discussion where we've been like, as a company, we are moving in this direction. But if a developer writes up a bug and it's unclear, they're going to get those same follow-up questions and pushback from the triage team that I would get. So in that way, it's equal footing. So if they write up a bug that's unclear, they'll probably spend extra time later explaining it to someone. And then who knows, hopefully the next time around, they might write that bug a little bit differently. I kind of approach it as all I can control is myself and what I'm bringing to the team. So I'm going to do my best. Maybe that will inspire someone to change how they do things. Maybe not, but at the end of the day, I'm proud of the work that I brought to the table.
Cool. One last question, and that one actually coming from me. And I was listening to your points. I like a lot of pair testing with developers, but I use it differently. I use it mostly, if I go back to the session with Alan, as kind of a training method. My objective is to make sure the developers know upfront what I'm going to test out of their code so that they test it before they give it to me, and so we reduce the time. Have you found that? Have you seen that, again, developers start testing more before they come to you?
Absolutely. So in general, I feel incredibly lucky. The team of developers I work with really live in that culture of quality. And I think that's a statement to how the company has developed this culture of quality from day one. So typically it's not even an issue. The developers are thinking about quality and writing unit tests and doing some of their own testing before it even gets to me. But so I wouldn't say that I've, in a structured way, done pair testing to train, but I think it does go both ways. I like to think that we have an ongoing open dialogue about quality and how can we each kind of stay within our roles, but think about quality from the perspective of our role, whether it be tester or developer, and contribute to quality.
Excellent. So we are just on the top of the hour and we are done right now. I need to say something that it didn't feel like it's the first time that you're presenting. If you need references for any conference, you can give them my name and I will be more than happy to give you a recommendation on that. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you very much. You couldn't see me shaking over here. I'm glad.
We actually could because you have a camera. Don't worry.
Oh, oh no.
Everyone, I know there are a number of questions that we didn't get to them. Please go ahead into the Slack channel of Rachael and answer and ask them, actually. And we are going to go